contrary to the things that are behind me and the Disney shirt I'm wearing, this is not a Disney video. This is a One Piece video. Um, so I'm going to be talking about the Levely, Reverie. I just refer to it as Reverie because that just sounds better than Levely. Or at least it makes more sense to me. The reason I have all of these different, mostly Disney princesses and Black Panther here, is because, of course, the Reverie is, within One Piece, is the meeting of all of these, 50 different leading kingdoms throughout the One Piece world that are affiliated with, among the 170 some nations that are affiliated with the world government. And so I wanted to put up a bunch of different princesses and king. I don't have anything else that has a king on it that's not T'Challa. I'm sorry. So that's what you get. So this is One Piece based. Because I will find reasons for things. So, this is another one of my, rulers and leaders videos, and in regards to the world government, I kind of decided to work bottom up a little bit. So technically, in regards to the hierarchy of the world government, it is technically like the citizens of the One Piece world. Well, the citizens that are members of the world government nations are kind of on the bottom of that rung. And then you have the leaders, the rulers, the kings, queens, mostly kings and queens, that are the rulers of those nations. And then every 4 years, they gather together at Castle Pangea in Marijois to discuss the different problems that are going on in the world. Whether that be pirates, whether that be revolutionaries, whether that be Fishman Island, whether that be, I don't know, exceedingly high taxes. I don't know what other big problems they would be discussing, but there'd be other big, major issues that they would discuss. And they would gather together at Marijois and discuss it around the big, giant round table. Or at least that's where the kings and queens would discuss it, while their attendants, their bodyguards, their children, heirs, whatever variation of it, would be out, like, milling about and, socializing out in the kind of, community gathering area. Well, I'll be outside in the community gathering space. There's food. Don't make the celestial dragons angry. Where all of that's taking place. And we saw a good chunk of that throughout the course of what we saw during the Reverie arc very recently. And a little bit more of that much more recently when we saw what happened with Cobra and Vivi and stuff. So I will be getting to those. But kind of what I meant from like bottom up is that, like, we have the, all of the different rulers that gather together, the 50 kings that gather together, and then they make these decisions. And then technically above them is the celestial dragons, and then above the celestial dragons is the Gorosei. And then, unbeknownst to the rest of the world, above the Gorosei is Im-sama. And I will be talking about kind of Im-sama last in this setup, so next week I should be talking about the celestial dragons as a whole, and then I will be doing a video about the Gorosei, and then I will do a video about Im-sama. Im-sama will probably consist of me going over information we do know, and then going over some different theories. So that's kind of what we get for, like, the world government hierarchy setup. So, time to talk about Reverie. So, we know that about 800 years ago or so is when the world government was formed, and that kind of since then, every 4 years, they've had it that they have this giant meeting, this Council of Kings, this World Summit, however you want to put it, where they have all of these different world leaders come together. And I don't know if it was always specifically 50 or if that's just what it's been for a good chunk of time. Initially there were only the 20 different founding nations of the world government. And then from there, others probably joined either out of fear or out of like, oh, well, let's just go and join them because they seem to be the better option. Or were forced to join or things like that. And they've just stayed that way. I'm, I'm sure that countries can leave the world government if they so choose. That kind of seems to be what was going to happen with Lelucia before it got, giant holed into the ocean. So we get to see that. And we know that there's been, within the time frame of the story, this is the first full current Reverie that we've just finished up that we've seen. But we know of other Reveries that have happened in the past. We know that, 4 years prior there was a Reverie. We know that 8 years prior is when everything happened with Vivi and Wapple, which I will go over again. And then, prior to that, there would have been others. We know that, a certain number of years ago, there was probably one that happened after, Goldie Roger was executed. And, them having to discuss that may have resulted in the formation of the warlord system and stuff. And then, there's just other things, there's stuff with Fishman Island that has been brought up, and all of these other different various things that have been brought up at the Reveries to the kings to discuss. Motions that need to be passed and things along those lines. So it is kind of like, government having to deal with each other, different sides of politics having to deal with other kings and queens that have, opposing views, having to vote together on different things. So very similar to, the way things work in any government that has a Congress and a Senate and things like that. Representatives, all that type of stuff. Parliament, however you want to put it. Very similar to that. And as I pointed out, I believe in a previous video, in the overall video, I did point out that the Reverie is somewhat based off of the United Nations, which I will go over a little bit more at the end, near the end of the video, but it is based off of that concept of a lot of these different countries coming together and either having their leader or having a representative at this, council together to discuss different issues that are going on in the world and different ways that they can act to either prevent things from happening, stop the continuation of things that are happening, things along those lines. Kind of what we do know in regards to a few things is that when it comes to like kind of the customs and the procedures for the Reverie, that it is, they arrive at Marijois at this sacred place. They all have to go up the giant steps and look at all the different statues of the different previous, the original founding kings and everything. We do not know if Nefeltari D. Lily is one of them. Probably not, but possibly. For the sake of the rest of the world, they may have to, like, for keeping up appearances, they may have to have her statue there, but I doubt it. And that stuff, we have, the socializing area, new kings and queens to the, to the Reverie. They're required to go and, pledge their allegiance to the empty throne. We saw that with Stelly. Now, I don't know if that means every time that there is just a new king or a new queen, or if it's every time it starts like a new dynasty. Or a new, family line, or whatever the case may be. Generally, those tend to start whenever there is a new king that is, that marries into the family. If it was, like with Stelly's case, Stelly married, married Princess Isinonet, and they, so then he becomes the new king, and she is kind of the queen consort, but I don't know exactly how that works entirely with One Piece logic and everything. Oda doesn't seem to prescribe to the whole thing of like, oh, the royal lineage stays with whoever the thing was, but that happened with Alabasta, so other kingdoms may just have other setups with that. So we get some of that. We also know that at each meeting there is a chairman. One of the participants asked as a chairman, so kind of like the Speaker of the House or the leader of the Senate that is in charge of keeping things on track and things like that. Or like the President of the United Nations or the head of the United Nations. That it is their job to keep things on track and running smoothly and everything. And we know that on the current one, we know that that was King Hamburger from the Bollywood Kingdom. I am going to do a separate video where I go over all of these different miscellaneous kingdoms where we really only know the ruler and the basics of the kingdom. Those will be later on. Because I'll talk about Bollywood and Kano and a whole bunch of the other countries that we've dealt with in the past that aren't big enough to have like enough information to have a video of their own. We know that current participants in the world, or in the World Summit, in the Reverie, are several different ones from the Grand Line: Alabaster Ryugu, Dressrosa, the Sakura Kingdom, the Protence Kingdom, the Aegis Kingdom, the Lelucia Kingdom, the Whiteland Kingdom from the North Blue, along with the Dual Kingdom in the North Blue. From the East Blue, we have the Goa Kingdom and the Feront Kingdom. From the South Blue, we have the Evil Black Drum Kingdom. We have the Roshuan Kingdom. We have the Samba Kingdom. Samba Kingdom. From the West Blue, we have the Elysia Kingdom, the Kano Kingdom, and the Bollywood Kingdom. From unknown regions, we have the Tanjin Kingdom, the Shishano Kingdom, the Bestlin Kingdom, the South Fire Kingdom, the Chaco Kingdom, the Jablia Kingdom, the some of these I'm like, I don't remember these kingdoms very much. The Jingabal Kingdom, the Cameron Kingdom, the Nagautsu Kingdom, the Beef Kingdom, and the Ringo Kingdom. And we know that there's been other former participants, probably, like the Sorbet Kingdom, with Kuma in charge, and, the Germa Kingdom in regards to Judge and things along those lines. And those types of things, that those were considered nations that were members of the world government. So we've seen those. We also know that, as I stated before, they tend to bring, companions with them. The kings will bring their wives. We saw Wapol bring, Cinderella with him. We saw, I'm sure in the past at various points in times, like, King Riku Dolz III's wife probably accompanied him at various points in time. Things along those lines. We also know that they tend to bring their children as well. Vivi was there, Rebecca was there, Viola was there, Shirahoshi and her brothers were there. Lots of kingdoms also bring, those types of people with them. They also bring different advisors with them. Pell and Chaka and Igaram were with, excuse me, they were, with Cobra, and we have, some of the other ones, like Leo was there with, the Dressrosa party, and we know that Kureha and the Ishi 100 were there with, and Alapin were there with, Dalton from the, for the Sakura Kingdom and stuff like that. So we know that a lot of different ones come as, companions, because it's like, it makes sense for you to bring, a child, your heir to come with you to these different types of things, because then they can, associate with a lot of these different rulers, meet the children that are going to also becoming rulers, that are also going to become rulers of these other kingdoms, possibly around the same time you are, or at the very least, so where you might have allies. And we know that at this most recent one, a lot of the ones that are actually Luffy's allies actually ended up meeting. And that now that kind of means, the people from Drum Island know that they had, they already knew they kind of had allies in, Alabasta, but now that they know they have allies in Dressrosa as well, and in Fishman Island, and vice versa. So we know that they're able to piece that together and possibly figure out a few other things. As I stated also, we know that not every kingdom ends up here, because I believe it is stated that Water 7 is associated with the world government, but they are not part of this because they are not a big enough economy, I guess, or a big enough contributor to the world government that they are given a seat at the table. Otherwise, as I stated in the Iceberg video, we would have seen Iceberg here, and he's not there. Although that would have been nice to then have him figure out, these princesses are all friends of Straw Hats. Okay, I'll have to mark that down. I don't know how much he pays attention to things, but maybe he would have figured that out. Maybe his new secretary would have figured that out. I don't know. So it makes perfect sense for them to have companions there. I know that a lot of times when it comes to different diplomats that go to different countries, and, ones that are then, representatives of, at the UN or different things like that, that they will take their families there with them. It doesn't mean that they're there 365 days out of the year during their tenure. It just means that they have a setup that is, they have a place to live there, and then they can also return to their own home in whatever country they are from for a while and then go back. And so it makes sense that they would bring their family with them. It's an experience. It's a good way of, keeping, countries, associated with each other. So there's, in some cases, less animosity, but there's still a lot of animosity there involved. In regards to the history that we are aware of, yes, we know that, 800 years ago is when the world government was formed. Probably the Reverie started happening pretty soon after that, mostly because it meant that the celestial dragons, or the budding celestial dragon community at that point in time, and possibly, Eam, along with possibly like the original, member, the original four Gorosei, were, setting up and gaining their power and, setting all of that up and everything. And a good way of keeping an eye on other countries was to have them come to the Reverie, was to set up this system where they come to the Reverie and discuss issues. And then you only have it be that like certain ones come, possibly ones that were the former kingdoms of the celestial dragons, other ones that were possibly, very, high contributors to, the coffers and things like that of the world government. And, it would allow Eam and the Gorosei, whatever form the Gorosei would have taken at that point in time, to keep an eye on these other countries, because they probably, given the fact of, we don't know exactly how good of, mass communication they would have had at that point in time, 800 years ago, given the fact that they just kind of possibly destroyed the kingdom that held a whole bunch of that technology, and now it's gone. We don't know where they would have stood for that stuff, so they probably wanted to be like, okay, well, we need to keep an eye on these kingdoms. And if we bring them here, have them come here every 4 years, we can keep an eye on them as they develop. And things along those lines. And that's probably what happened. So for, the next, this, in regards to like the history and the past and, kind of the different topics that have been discussed at different topics and issues that have been discussed at the Reverie. And kind of the furthest back one that we know is, I believe, the having, 200 years ago, to have the Ryugu kingdom join the world government. And its king was granted a place at the Reverie. So that would have been Neptune's ancestor, a great-great-great-grandfather, whatever the case would have been at that point in time. I did want to point out, because I think it is mentioned in the Sky Island arc, the Skypiea arc, that the kingdom that Nolan returned to, that Nolan was from, that they had to get permission from the Reverie to go and find, to go and find Jaya again and stuff, find Shandora. And I think that was something that was mentioned there, but I don't 100% remember, and it wasn't listed here when I was looking at the, Wikipedia, so I'm not sure. So yeah, 200 years ago was when that became a thing, is when, fishmen and merfolk and mermaids and everything were now considered equal to humans to a degree. And we all know, because of everything that happened with Fishman Island and Fisher Tiger and a whole bunch of other stuff with Shirahoshi, with Kami, with all this other stuff, that is not the worldview that continued. That, just because they decreed that did not mean that it actually went through very well. People, that racism and that stigmas and everything like that were still very much in place within not just the world government, but the rest of the world at that point as well, against, fishmen and everything. Probably not every place, but a good chunk of the places that had the world government propaganda and things like that probably still saw the fishmen and the merfolk as nothing but, fish. And a lot of them were definitely still enslaved. From there, kind of the next one we know is about 16 years ago. There was the Fishman Island relocation started. So this is when Queen Otohime, along with kind of being accompanied by Milzigard, where she went up to Marijois, and she was able to get a petition that was signed by the kings, and probably the Gorosei involved in this as well, that they can work on trying to move Fishman Island to the surface and to help them grow closer to the humans. And so that was Queen Otohime's wish, and we know that she went through so much trying to get so many of the different, the signatures and everything like that that she needed from the citizens and everything like that. And then everything happened with Hody and everything, but she had gotten to the point where she would have had enough signatures. And then, of course, everything happened, and they all got burned, and then she got assassinated. And Neptune, in his grief, is just like, no, I don't want anything to do with this anymore. But his children, the Neptune brothers and Shirahoshi, they take up the mantle where their mother, they take up their mother's torch. And they are like, we are going to do this. We are going to continue this. We are going to try to make it that our mother's dream comes true. And then now, currently, we had that come to fruition at the current Reverie, where, the Neptune, the royal family, were at the Reverie. The Fishman royal family, the Ryugu Kingdom royal family, were at the Reverie. I'll go over this in much more detail when I eventually get to the Ryugu Kingdom, which will be several different videos over a bunch of the different characters because they're all very interesting. But so we get through that, and and we know that at the current Reverie, there was the decision to actually, they agreed that they will try to get Fishman Island to the surface, which, given all the shaking in the ocean right now, that's probably a good idea. So we'll see what happens there. We also know that there's all of the issues that were still compiled with, Fisher Tiger and slaves and the celestial dragons and everything along those lines, that those, where Otohime and Fisher Tiger had all of the, these, opposing viewpoints about humans, but they did not discredit each other's viewpoints. Fisher Tiger did not think that Otohime was wrong, and Otohime did not think that Fisher Tiger was wrong. It's just, this is based off of their experiences, and they did not discredit it. And that is what I do like about those two, that it's like they hold two opposing viewpoints, but they also agree, like, she's not denying what he went through. And Queen Otohime and King Neptune were the two people, the two that Fisher Tiger told about his experience at Marijois when he was a slave there, and why he was going to go there and free all the fishmen and free all the slaves, as many as he could. So they don't discredit him. She does not deny what he went through. And it's not that she pities him, and I'll go through that a lot more in the other one, but like they each hold their own opinion about humans, but she's not saying that he's wrong, and he's not saying that she's wrong. So I'll go into that more in the other Otohime video later on when I get to that. And then we have the Reverie 8 years ago, which is kind of the first time where we start learning that this is a thing, because we get this little flashback, because when they are on Drum Island, Vivi recognizes Wapol, because she's like, wait a second, I know him. And, later on, she ends up recognizing him. And she recognizes him because he's, the former king of Drum Island at that point in time, or the runaway despot king of Drum Island at that point in time. And she remembers the Reverie. And then we get this little flashback where we see, the kings at this Reverie. I believe at that time it's referred to as the Council of Kings, is just how Vivi refers to it. Because at that point in time, it was still very early on in One Piece, and Oda hadn't quite built up all of this stuff yet for, back building all of the rest of the world at that point and stuff yet in the manga. He probably had ideas about it, but he didn't have it 100% planned out. So he just called it the Council of Kings. So the Reverie is also the Council of Kings type of thing. So we know that they were discussing Dragon that year, because we see King Thalassa Lucius, along with, Cobra and Wapol and a bunch of the other ones, discussing Dragon and how dangerous the revolutionaries are. And, we get the picture of, him holding up the picture of Dragon, and them discussing it and everything, and Wapol not caring about what's going on with that. So Cobra then yells at him. And then, of course, Wapol, to get revenge on Cobra, because Wapol's an idiot, this is well documented. After they're leaving, they're all leaving the Reverie, he sees Vivi sitting there, and he ends up, slapping her. I went over this at length, and Wapol, Dalton, Cobra and Vivi videos. And now here again, he slaps her, and then she, of course, takes the high road, is very mature, and, just apologizes because she doesn't want her kingdom to go to war. And then Wapol storms off, and then Vivi starts crying, which is fair because she's like, 8 or 7 or whatever at that age, or at that point in time. So she's fair enough to start crying after she just gets slapped by a grown man, and all of that. So we know that happens. That dragon is the main discussion at that point in time, which kind of means that around 8 years ago is probably when the Revolutionary Army are gathering a lot more traction, at that point. And, and then from there, we don't really hear too much about it. We know that, the first part of the story takes place during, like the 2 years, 2 years after that Reverie. Or we know that would have been another Reverie of 4 years later, about 2 years before the start of the story, but we don't know what the topics of discussion would have been that year. That hasn't been explained to us. And then we have the current Reverie that is happening now after the 2-year time skip, or that just finished up. And during that time frame, we have the different bits where we see all the different kingdoms heading off to the rulers and everything heading off to all heading off to Marijois and stuff like that. So we see all those royalty traveling and everything like that, and eventually getting there, being escorted by the Marines. We see that some of them end up almost being kidnapped, and then they get saved, and a whole bunch of other stuff that happened there. We see them all arriving. They arrive at the Red Port, and they actually arrive to all of this fanfare, from the people that live on the Red Port, which are probably family of Marines, that work at the Red Port, but also, just other people that live there, because it's just like, oh, if we set up here, then, there's a shop here, and there's people that need to buy food and clothes and stuff like that. So, the economy is always built up around like military bases and things like that as well, because you have soldiers there that need stuff, but you can't always get on the base, or they want to leave base, stuff like that. So they're very the rulers are generally pretty popular there when they show up, because they probably bring in a lot of income and tourists and stuff like that as well, for people coming to see all of these different royals, royal watchers, everything that happens with that. And, so we see all of that. And we know that Judge mentioned during the Whole Cake arc that he had, that it was like, oh, if I have, I have my technology, and if I have the help of the Charlottes, and then I, can then, still curry favor with the world government, then I can still, be a member of the world government and reign over the North like I want to. That does not happen. That does not happen. They are fully kicked out of the world government at that point in time. So everything that happens there. And then we get into the Reverie arc proper, where we have it that, we have all this stuff where, we kind of get these introductions where we have, Rebecca and Vivi and Shirahoshi all meeting together, and Dalton, and interactions with Wapol, and like all these different ones meeting and interacting with each other, and, Sai and Leo, and all these different things that are happening, or all of these different allies of Luffy that are secret allies of Luffy, all interacting with each other and building up those connections, which is very good for things down the line, or could be very good for things down the line. So we have a bunch of that happening, but then we also have it that while a bunch of those things are happening, we also have it that, this is when Shirahoshi gets attacked by, Roswald, and then, or not Roswald, by Charlos, and then, gets protected by, Milzigard and all of this stuff. And then, of course, Bonnie infiltrates and finds her way into the, Celestial Dragon City to find, Kuma and everything. And we know that Sabo, along with Morley and Karasu and Lindbergh, are all here during this part, during the Reverie. And there's like that big battle that happens between, Fujitora and Aramaki, along with, Aramaki. Yeah, I was like, yeah, that's the right one. Ryukogu. They fight against Karasu and Morley and all of this. And, Sabo was running around the palace, and everything happens there. And we know that the big discussion that happens that year, that happened this year, or the two big discussions, was A, with Fishman Island, and agreeing to then bring Fishman Island up to the surface. The second big issue that they were discussing was the Seven Warlords of the Sea, the Shishibukai. And this is where, Cobra and Riku Dole III come forward, and they explain, the plights and everything that happened to Alabasta and Dressrosa and everything to the rest of the world government, and they decide that, okay, along with Fujitora, they're like, okay, the warlord system is not something that we need anymore with the amount of problems that it has caused. Technically, Moria, Moria was just a lazy SOB. But, Mihawk and, Hancock, they technically haven't really caused that much trouble for the world government at this point in time, because they don't 100% know that she helped Luffy back with Impel Down and everything. But, so it's just like, they were okay, but the rest of them, Buggy technically wasn't causing problems at that point in time, but Crocodile had caused problems. Moria had been a disappointment. Law had betrayed them. Everything happened on Dressrosa with Doflamingo and all of that stuff. So it's just like, they're just like, okay, we need to scrap the warlord system. And we're going to start using this, SSG. We're going to start using the Seraphim. So that's what they decide. And they abolish the warlord system, and that spreads across the world and everything. And so, that's everything that happens there. And then the next big issue that ends up happening is, of course, Cobra wants to go and discuss things with the Gorosei, which he does. He goes and he discusses with the Gorosei about the poneglyphs, and he's asking them questions about, Nefeltari D. Lily, and about the family in general, and about the world government, and about the swords, and about the poneglyphs, and about the, ancient weapons and things along those lines, stuff that he should technically not know about. And stuff. And then, of course, this is when Eam shows up. And, then he's like, oh, no, this is not good. And, everything happens there. And Sabo shows up and tries to protect him. And then, of course, so many things are happening during that time frame. We also know that, the council was going to discuss things about the different nations that are in rebellion and everything like that. The different nations that were in a bunch of the different Four Blues that had gone into rebellion against their kingdom, that had gone into rebellions against their kings or their rulers and stuff like that. And, how they were going to deal with those. And, Cobra dies during all of this. The world government try to hide it. The Gorosei try to hide it, but that doesn't happen because, Morgans gets his hands on that information and then prints it everywhere. And, Vivi was going to get captured. Shirahoshi almost got captured again, but got saved. We know, by Sai and Leo. Sai and Leo attack, Charlos again, and then Milzigard, as the end result of that, is the one that gets executed, unfortunately. And then I am going to do a video about Milzigard, probably alongside the Celestial Dragons one. And, so we get a lot of that. So much happened at the Reverie that this past setup, and there's this happened, that happened, this person is now dead, that person died, this person is now missing, Vivi and Wapol are both missing. Hopefully everybody else managed to escape and get to safety and everything for the other allies and all of this other stuff. And we know that there's these other nations that are rebelling still. And so there's all of that stuff that was going on during that time frame, all during the Reverie. Some of it was talked about in the Reverie, as in by the kings and queens that were on the council and stuff like that, like the warlords. And they were probably all very, very concerned when they heard the fact that Cobra had been dead, or that Cobra had been assassinated while they were there and stuff. Although they pin it on Cobra, that's just Gorosei and Morgans pin it on Sabo, they put it on Sabo. And so we get a ton of that. And now we're waiting for the rest of the fallout for it, for like the other shoe to drop is what we're waiting on. Because it's not like a bunch of those kings and queens aren't aware that Lelucia was a kingdom. They just interacted with King Seki. So it's not like they don't know. So now they're going to have to, I mentioned in the chapter review that basically like all the Marines are being gaslit by the world government that no, Lelucia never existed. But I've been there, so there's that. But then there's also the other side of things where it's just like, all of these kings and queens that were aware of King Seki and Princess Komain and everything. And they're like, we have a problem. Their island is gone. And the world government is saying they never existed. So we don't know the last time he used the giant space laser cannon. Um, we don't know exactly, so it may have been a long enough time ago that it would have been a little bit easier to cover up information at that point in time. But now, given the amount of communication that is available, even basic communication with the snails and with, even like the snail televised, things like that, like with Uta's concert and stuff like that. I just got film run on Blu-ray, so I'm going to be watching it again soon. So I'm happy about that. But, a bunch of this other stuff where they're in newspapers and all this mass communication type stuff, even if it is 100% accurate, it's still going to get that information out there because that's what Morgan wants to do. He wants to write a good story. And what's a better story than giant island flippin' gone, hole in ocean where island was? That type of a thing. So we know that that stuff's going to probably end up being out there, and then the world government can't do as much as they used to in order to suppress that information. So we'll see how that affects things later on down the line from that stuff. Not really too much else here. As I said, there's the different variations of like how to pronounce and everything like that for Reverie and Levely and World Council and a whole bunch of other stuff. I just prefer Reverie. It sounds better than Levely. The League of Nations, the League of Kings, and then the League of Nations in that setup or the World Summit are playoffs of the fact that I mentioned that the Reverie is very similar to the United Nations. For a bit of history, the United Nations was established in 1945, just after World War II. Before that, there was like a predecessor to it that I believe was like the League of Nations, and then it turned into the United Nations and stuff like that, with the three big founders being America, the UK, and Russia, which is now causing problems now. Now it's causing problems. And stuff. And that currently there are 193 member states and then 2 observer states. I don't remember what the observer states means. But it is this setup, it's most people know what the UN is. It's all of these different nations coming together and trying to discuss different issues that are going on in the world and how they can help and how they can stop things and things like that. There's stuff that's, UNICEF that is connected to the United Nations in regards to, UNICEF ambassador for kids and world hunger and things like that. And a bunch of that other stuff. So there's a lot of that involved in it as well, to try to fix problems in the world. Sometimes more or less successful than one would like. But I also wanted to make a comparison for the Reverie that it is kind of also similar to the Round Table from the Arthurian legends with, King Arthur, he sits at the table among his knights, and that it's a round table. That means none are better than the others, that they are all even, that they are all equal. And the Round Table, the Council Round Table in the Reverie is that kind of setup that not one of these nations is technically better than the others. They were all invited here and they all have equal say in what is going on. So I wanted to make that kind of comparison as well, because sometimes even within, the United Nations, certain countries have more powers than others. And, there's also other various other world summits and things like that happen within our world, like the G8 World Summit and the, whatever other different world summits where all of these other leaders are gathering together to discuss issues in the world and stuff like that. So that is very common in our world as well, and it's also something that clearly happens within the One Piece world. So we'll see what happens now after the Reverie, other repercussions that'll come out of what happened and everything. We'll see kind of what happens there. The next one on this setup for the next Rulers and Leaders video should be about the Celestial Dragons. So history of what we know about the Celestial Dragons and just how freaking horrible they are. And then I'll move on to probably just do Milzigard after that one, and then do, because we don't have enough for me to do anything about Garing Figureland yet. Eventually, if we get more information about him, I will do a video about him, but not yet. Mostly just because we don't have a whole lot of information And I don't want to do one about the one that we don't have a whole lot of information about. So that's what we have. I thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video, and I hope you have a nice rest of your day. Bye.